I want to talk about some things today that have to do with as we go through life, there's certain things that we encounter. It's just inevitable. A lot of life is simply how we choose to look at it, how we choose to meet it with our attitude. But I want to talk about adversaries that often occur in our lives, and just think about this for a moment, for a little bit, about adversaries or enemies are needed for success. Success never is usually just a nice, smooth road. Invariably, there's going to be bumps in the road when we're on our way to any particular goal. I want you to think about that maybe sometimes when we have an adversary, it may indicate a transition in our life. It may indicate that we are on to something, so to speak. When these things come, it's a matter of how we view them as to whether it's an opportunity or just a problem. There's two ways to look at it. Give you an example. David was a shepherd boy around the hills of Judea there, I guess. And he'd take his dad's flock up in the hills, and I think they'd stay gone for weeks and weeks at a time, during the grazing season. And David was just a shepherd boy, one of several kids in that family, until he met Goliath one day. And without Goliath, David probably would have finished his life out herding sheep. Died virtually unknown. Probably what would happen to him. But he went from a shepherd to a military icon in one day, in just one battle. And the reason he was able to go from obscurity to importance was an adversary. Had he not had Goliath, we probably would not know about David. And so one victory over one enemy changed his entire life. And then from that point on, he was the king's favorite for a while, until Saul got troubled by a bad spirit from Yahweh because he disobeyed, He was a king's favorite because he overcame an adversary. Not because he was just a really nice kid, which he probably was. Not because he had slain a lion with his bare hands and a bear. He said he got a lion by his beard and he broke his neck or something like that. David was a pretty stout person, stout as an ox, I think it says in the scriptures. That's basically what he would have been had he not had the right adversary at the right time. And so the greater the adversary that you overcome, the greater the victory. Moses, without a Pharaoh, would still be down in Egypt somewhere. Died and we never heard of him. He'd still maybe be herding sheep up in Moab up there. And that's what he did for 40 years, till he was 80 years old. So without a Pharaoh to overcome, he would not have been known as a great leader or the great emancipator. Without a Pharaoh, without an adversary to overcome. He would never have been known as the lawgiver, because that's one of the terms we associate with Moses, the Mosaic law. But what was it that turned the tide for Moses? The great adversary. The adversary was the captain of a nation. He was the big boss of the day. Pharaohs were in the driver's seat back then. Egypt was absolutely the greatest power of the day, of the age. And Moses, with Yahweh backing him up obviously, but Moses still had to be the point man. Once he got Pharaoh to release the Israelites, the name of Moses has been emblazoned on history from then on. Without that Pharaoh, without that adversary, he would have died in obscurity. We'd never heard of the name Moshe. Actually, it's Hebrew is Moshe. We'd never heard of him. So you see, challenges bring out our best. When you have a difficult problem to solve, that's when you summon your skills. When you have something to overcome, that's when your grit shows. That's how you develop toughness, is through challenges. Challenges do resist us. And that's when our hidden, our latent talents often come to the surface. He didn't know I could do this. You know, when you're put in a certain situation, that's when you shine. And when you're in your element, that's when your talents become evident. Let's take, for example, you take a fish. You've heard the old phrase, a fish out of water. You take a fish out of the water and lay him on the beach, he just flops and goes in all directions. And he doesn't seem like he's very talented, does he? But you take that fish and you drop him in the water, you see his genius. You see his ability to glide through the water. You see his aerodynamic structure. It's what he was made to do. And when we find what we're made to do by being put in the right environment, then our talents become evident. Then we really succeed. And this was a situation with David where that was his forte. He was a tough kid. Put him in the right situation where those talents could become evident, and he went from shepherd to a military icon overnight in just a matter of a few hours. And what did it take? A Goliath to do it. An adversary, a huge adversary. It says his spear was like a weaver's beam. And you've seen these weaver's tables. Goliath was a huge guy. The bigger the enemy, the greater the victory, the greater the challenge, the greater your accomplishment. You know, an adversary may be your call to glory. That's what it was for Moses. That's what it was for David. The adversary is what made him what he was. Was it any friends of David that elevated him to a military icon? No. It was an enemy that he overcame. So Yahweh sometimes allows enemies in our path as a means for us to overcome so that we can have a victorious situation. And we learn some things about ourselves when we have these challenges. That much is certain. But the difference between failure and success can simply be a challenge, an adversary.